What's happening, YouTube? Owen here from Dark Entertainment, the place to hear tales from Wales and afar. If you're into creepy stories donated to us by people like yourselves, then feel free to like and subscribe, and hit that bell icon. Now, let's get into the video. So, now that we've established that I'm not dead, I shall continue with the second part of the Ghost of Llandaff episode. As I touched on in the last episode, I will be looking into the strange stories to come out of Llandaff and the area around the cathedral. There are masses of stories to come from this location, from spectral hellhounds to a headless woman that appears to levitate through the floor in the centre of the path running alongside the Llandaff Rugby Club on the Western Avenue. Although I have heard these stories, there has been very little in the way of eyewitness accounts, the main form of second-hand knowledge being a bloke down the pub said. But having said that, there are one or two stories that are much more prolific and the frequency of sightings a lot higher. Now, I told you there would be a bit of history in these episodes, and with good reason. As I touched on in the last episode, the Victorians, in their relentless striving to tame nature during the Industrial Revolution, installed a weir north of the cathedral. This was to slow the river and to tame the rapids in order to allow their barges carrying coffins of those who had passed on to be unloaded safely for transport to the cemetery. They would then be ferried via horse and cart for burial along the path of the dead. Looking at the overgrown but strangely beautiful graveyard, we can see that the majority of the graves are from Victorian and Edwardian eras, with the exception of a few older graves. But I can already hear you screaming out, "Hang on, saddler, you hefty wench. You said that the cathedral had been around for years." And you'd be right. So let's take a slip, trip and a fall back into time. In the not so distant past, a larger-than-life character entered the stage. Old Harry VIII waddled his way onto the throne of England and caused mayhem. Seeing the level of wealth being raked in by his Holy Roman Emperor, Pope Clement VII, big old Henry decided, "I'll have a bit of that," and broke with Rome, declaring himself head of the church. Now this split the nation. Many people felt that this was an insult to God and that Henry had no right to declare himself above the Pope. But many were angry that the monks were leading too comfortable lives whilst the common man struggled. Reformist ideology swept the nation. Ideas such as the common man should be able to read the Bible in English as opposed to Latin, and that only the head of the house should be able to understand the Word of God, were done away with. However, many monasteries refused to bend to the changes. These monks and friars met grisly ends, and the churches were razed to the ground. The empty shells of these marvels of engineering are still visible today, in the form of Tintern Abbey, Strata Florida, and Neath Abbey, along with many others. Llandaff Cathedral accepted the changes, but it is unclear how the monks and friars were dealt with in order for them to relinquish their status. During the dissolution, Henry VIII's commissioners would ride out and collect evidence of corruption. Evidence such as prostitution or drunken behaviour were collected and used as a stick to beat them into submission or destroy them. You'll be happy to know that I finished bumping my gums about history, and this leads me on to my first story. As I described in the last episode, my delicate disposition would not cope with being in a graveyard at night. I'm a bit of a wussy. But there are other, more robust people who have been there. They have reported on more than one occasion the sound of children laughing They state that out of the corner of their eyes, they spot the slightly translucent figures of children peeking around from trees and climbing, before fading into the background. One or two people have even stated that on several occasions, they have felt as though small hands have reached for theirs and held them. The feeling has caused them to recoil, and in some cases, burst out in tears. The photo you see on the screen now is a photo taken on a ghost walk in the cemetery itself. It shows the arm of one of the participants, but also shows what looks like a ghostly pale mist that some say resembles the face of a child. We do not know who these children are or were, but one thing is for certain: they are not always happy, as is evident from the next character. Once again, following on from my historical ear bashing, we don't know what evidence was found by Big Harry's commissioners, but it may be that there was some truth to one of the stories. Many people have reported seeing a horrific entity around the site of the cathedral: the ghostly apparition of a monk. The hooded figure stares directly at you and fills you with a deep sense of fear and anxiety. It is said to hover several feet above the ground, and on several occasions has been known to charge directly at people. In the early 2000s, two dog walkers from the nearby Llandaff estate were walking their dogs through the Llandaff fields when they began to feel like someone was watching them. They turned to see, hovering in the center of the field, the ghastly image of the Black Monk. As they peered in disbelief, the apparition began hurtling towards them. The dogs barked as they approached, and the men turned and began to sprint for the dual carriageway nearby. As they ran, they would occasionally glance over their shoulders, only to see the figure gaining on them. Panic, adrenaline, and fear coursed through them as they approached the road, when all of a sudden the figure vanished. They stood, panting on the pavement of Western Avenue, in utter disbelief and shock, as the dogs whined and barked at the empty path behind them. Safe to say, neither of them went back through that field at night. I went on the ghost walk when it was still running, not long after this incident. My then girlfriend and I were pleasantly surprised to see a colleague of mine and her then girlfriend were also on the tour. We all wandered down the path past the cathedral and into the fields where the tour guide began to tell the tale of poor Isabel Leonard. We then proceeded onto the banks of the river, where the tour began to talk about the sinister monk. After he had finished, I peered around but couldn't see my colleague or her partner anywhere. It was only the next week, when I saw her at work, did she say what had gone wrong. Whilst the guide was explaining the tale of poor Isabella, her partner had begun to feel highly anxious and scared. She couldn't understand since we'd only just started the tour. She glanced around to see a hooded figure staring directly at her from behind a group of bushes. She pointed it out to her partner, who couldn't see the figure, adamantly stating that the person was there. At this point, the tour guide had finished the first story. We began to walk towards the river, much to the relief of the couple. It was at this point that the guide explained about the Black Monk. She panicked and asked the tour guide assistant if they could leave the tour, and they were escorted away. Until this point, she had no prior knowledge of the spectre, and the realization that this was the figure staring at her. She decided enough was enough. The figure of the monk has reportedly been seen in the graveyard as well, but in a much more sinister capacity. Now, I will explain that I am not a believer in mediums. Not that I accuse anyone of lying or anything like that. but I have not seen any form of evidence to say that there is anything of substance behind the claims. Having said that, I should be more open-minded, since a neighbour told me recently that she found the previous owner of my house decomposing in our living room, much to my girlfriend's enjoyment. She was apparently a medium as well, and had held seances in our house, which actually explains quite a lot. But that's for a later episode. Anyway, on one occasion, a medium attended the ghost walk. Whilst in the graveyard, she stopped dead in her tracks. When approached by the tour guide, he found her crying. When he asked her what was wrong, she began stammering that the monk was staring at her, unmoving, and that he was clutching a small boy by the neck. The boy was wailing and crying, trying to kick the spectre in the location of his knees, but to no avail. His feet passed right through. It only lasted for a minute before the scene disappeared. If true, who knows what horrors befell the child in the past centuries. Anyway, that's all from us here at Dark Entertainment. We hope you've enjoyed the episode, and if so, please leave us a like and subscribe to the channel. It all helps the YouTube algorithm. We are on X, formerly known as Twitter, and on Facebook. And if you have a story of your own, please feel free to contact our email at dark_entertainment@outlook.com to discuss the telling of your tale. And remember, stay dark, stay creepy, and always laugh. Ta-ta!